Today we'll be installing the 10x17 portable car canopy from Harbor Freight. Normally I would get the 10x20 from Menards, which used to sell for around $260, and I noticed as of late it's jumped up to $400. Let's talk about cost a little bit. When I started putting these sheds up a few years ago, they were $259 with a 11% mail-in rebate at Menards. I thought that was an excellent deal because you could walk out of Menards for under $250 with this. And now the price is up to $400 less than 2 years later. And the other interesting thing that if you go to the website, there's actually two different lengths of this. One's a 15-footer and one's a 20-footer. The 20-footer is priced at $399 before the rebate. And oddly enough, the shorter one is actually $600. I really don't understand that. Just keep that in mind if you're buying these. I'm pretty sure that makes it a no-brainer that you want the 20-footer, unless your yard or the area you're putting it in is that prohibitively restrictive, but that's a huge difference in cost. So much that I'd question if that's even correct. You can find it a little bit cheaper on Amazon at this time for $315, so about a $40 savings shipped to your door, which is makes it a little more appealing, but not quite as appealing as the $230 at Harbor Freight. One of the first things that I've noticed, and I didn't know this until they actually brought out the boxes, is that this box is, although flatter, it's much longer. It's over 6 foot. It's about 6 foot 4 inches long. The one from Menards is a little bit wider, a little bit taller, but probably only 2/3 the length. So I thought I could easily fit two of these in the back of my car. In reality, it took about everything to get both of these in there with the seat down, and even then it was questionable. So keep that in mind if you're planning on transporting these from Harbor Freight. Make sure you have a big enough vehicle, and the fact that I could get them into a 2012 Golf means that you could probably pretty much get them into anything else. I was expecting them to be very similar in how they assemble, but I'm actually pleasantly surprised so far at some of the advantages. I'm seeing the tubing size looks to be about the same, so that's good, but I do like the fact that they have labels that are legible. On the Shelterlogic, a lot of times the print is smeared or it's faint, so you can't even look at the part numbers on them, so you have to match them up with ones that hopefully you can find a good part number on. So I like that. I was spending some time, Sam's helping me put this together, and he was going to get all the nuts and bolts like we normally do with the Shelterlogic. You need to separate all the bolts and nuts. There's 3 different sizes, a small, medium, and large. And then the nuts, and there's some washers in some cases on the bottom brackets that you should use. You have to separate those all out, and that takes, in Sam's case or anybody's case, it's 15-20 minutes to separate those all out. The difference in size between the small and the medium and large is pretty small, so you have to actually make sure you have each one and you use it as a reference and separate all those out, and just makes it go faster. But this, according to the manual, is mostly slip fit connection, so there's very few bolts and nuts, only about a dozen according to this, and that's going to speed things up considerably just by saving the time to separate them out, in addition to having to put them all through together. So I do like that so far. I like the labeling. And in this case they give you some rope, which wasn't included in the Shelterlogic one. I think that's for pulling the canopy over. I haven't read the manual yet on that. There's a box of hardware very similar to what you'd see with the Shelterlogic. Your brackets for, I think this is similar to the lower brackets on the Shelterlogic. They give you some ground anchors that have gold galvanized coating on them, along with the rest of the stuff, along with the ratchets. Your cable connections, and there's your small bag of the hardware, bolts, nuts, and washers, and they actually give you nylock nuts, which is nice. Shelterlogic didn't do that. And then some pin connections, so they do use some pin connections and some hairpins or cotter pins to go through those, and that's going to save us quite a bit of time there. check our squareness of the frame assembly. Ensure that helps us put the tarp on a little bit easier, although you might be able to get away with skipping this step, and the tarp itself might square things up, but it's not hard to do. And in this case, I found it interesting that with the Harbor Freight version, they don't give you the diagonal measurement, they give you the end measurement only, and then they tell you that the A and B measurements need to be the same. If you use a little bit of trig all that time that we spent in school, you got 10 foot 2 inches wide and then 17 foot along the side. That gives us our diagonals to be 19 feet 10 inches, so I saved you a little bit of time there if you watch this video. We'll make sure that those numbers are reasonably close, then we'll go ahead and put our ground anchors in. So I would say that the anchor quality is a little bit higher for the Harbor Freight shed versus the Shelterlogic, only because they actually weld the end of the eye together. Probably not necessary in this case, but a nice touch and gives you some added security that that eye isn't going to open up on you. Alright, while Sam finishes some of the final touches on the shed, we'll take a quick look around. It turned out just as well as the Shelterlogic in my opinion. The Harbor Freight version uses Velcro straps to hold up the door, which I think I like the Shelterlogic ones a little bit better. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with it, although it's not as long as the other one. I wish it was the 20-foot long, but we'll take what we can get for the price that we paid. Nice and bright inside. I like the white color on the inside, which is similar to the Shelterlogic, I believe. We'll step over and take a look at it. I would say that the installation is way faster without having all those bolts and nuts, and we'll go through a list of all the advantages and disadvantages, or the comparison of the two sheds in the final slide for this video. The Shelterlogic is actually gray on the inside as well. I would say that the tarp material is slightly heavier. I don't have a mil rating, and you can see what happens over time. These nuts can actually loosen up, either that or they were never tightened the first time, which could be a definite possibility. Ceiling is not as high, it doesn't really need to be, that's okay, but we do have the extra length, which is nice. Otherwise, very similar construction, same size tubing. These will be the go-to sheds moving forward, just for the installation time and the cost. Despite us losing a little bit of area, we can just put more of these up. A summary of the advantages of the Harbor Freight versus the Shelterlogic shed. The Harbor Freight has much less hardware. All the joints are slip fit connections. They'll save you a lot of time in separating all the bolts, nuts, and washers. They provide nylock nuts to prevent loosening, and that is an issue over time with the Shelterlogic. In our experience, you'll see where the nuts do work their way loose if you don't have something similar to the nylock, so I thought that was a nice feature with the Harbor Freight. The Harbor Freight is taller in the middle, at least by a foot, maybe foot and a half, and could theoretically accommodate a ceiling deck and storage for some added space utilization. And the taller ceiling also gives the peak a little bit higher, steeper angle for snow to come off it versus a Shelterlogic, and that can be advantageous if you're dealing with a lot of snow in your area. Has welded eyes on the anchors. Again, not a real big deal, but it is nice to know that they took the extra time to give you welded eyes in case they are stressed in a direction that can open that up. That will help prevent that. Significantly less cost to purchase, about 30% less in 2022. It has a white interior, which actually brightens things up quite a bit, and that's pretty noticeable when they're side by side when you go into each one of them. It comes with the ropes for putting the top cover on. Again, not a real big deal. Most people have that, but just saves you the time and hassle having to go find the rope and cut it. Make sure you have the right length and or cut it to the right length. And one thing we didn't mention, They do have protective pipe caps on all the different parts of the frame, which is nice. You'll notice that when you install any of the sheds out on the dirt or on the ground, you're going to get build up in the end of the pipes, and those protective pipe caps can help. That they don't. There's a couple sections, I believe it's the lower pipes that hold the main cover on, do not have protective pipe caps, so you still have that issue, but all the major other parts of the frame do have protective pipe caps, which is kind of nice. For the Shelterlogic 10 by 20, it has a 3 foot longer length, so about 18% more space. All the hardware uses the same size nuts, the main bolts and the wire rope clamps, so you don't have to switch between the sockets. The Harbor Freight actually uses a 10mm main bolt size for the nylocks, but the wire rope clamps are 8mm, I believe, so you do have to have a couple different sizes of sockets. Not a big inconvenience, but it can be if you're having multiple people work on different parts with different drivers already set up ahead of time to handle them. And one thing we thought was a little bit nicer was having the bungee cords for the door. When you roll it up and retain it with the bungee cords was a little bit more robust than the Velcro, which may degrade over time and end up not holding as well. So that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate any comments, suggestions, throw them below. We'll put a link to any tools or other videos that we reference here, so that you guys can get other opinions and help you execute the installation. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.